The fog was dense and sticky, enveloping the coast like a gray shroud. Pedro, an amateur documentarian obsessed with ruins and sea legends, had traveled for days to reach the remote Bone Beach, a place on the coast almost forgotten, known for its relentless winds and, more importantly, for the giant skeleton of the freighter Corriente Quebrada, Broken Current, which had been beached there for over 70 years. The ship, once a giant of the waves, now lay rusty and twisted, its metal plates groaning under the force of the tides and time. It was said that the crew had mysteriously disappeared during an unprecedented storm, and that their spirits still roamed the deck, searching for a rest they never found.
Pedro parked his vehicle on a soft sand trail, a few kilometers from the beach. Visibility was almost zero, and the car's headlights could barely pierce the fog, which seemed to intensify with every step. He grabbed his backpack with photographic equipment, an audio recorder, a powerful flashlight, and a small camera attached to his chest. Before leaving, he was startled by a figure that materialized beside the trail. A tall, rugged-looking man, in wet clothes and a worn straw hat. He was carrying a fishing bag and watched Pedro with opaque, expressionless eyes. "You're really going in there?" the stranger said in a hoarse voice. "I am. I'm making a documentary," Pedro replied, trying to sound confident. "Some things weren't meant to be filmed, things that shouldn't be remembered." The man paused, looking out at the shrouded horizon. "They don't like visitors." Pedro hesitated. "Who are they?"
"The ones who were left behind," the man said, before slowly disappearing into the fog. Thinking it was just a superstitious local trying to scare him, Pedro shook it off and went on. But the words kept hammering in his mind. The air was heavy, with the salty smell of the sea mixed with a metallic, rancid odor of rust and something denser, almost putrid. The silence, broken only by the lapping of the water, was oppressive, and Pedro felt a growing sense of isolation. With each step, the sand sucked at his feet, as if trying to stop him from moving forward. After nearly an hour of uncertain walking, the colossal silhouette of the Corriente Quebrada emerged from the mist. Its rusty structures rose against the gray sky like a monstrous skeleton, its twisted boilers looking like exposed organs. The ship was leaning to port, trapped in the sand and rocks, its passageways exposed by corrosion. A chill ran down Pedro's spine. This was not just an abandoned ship. It was a floating tomb.
He started filming. He narrated his way to the hull, recording everything. The large crack caused by the impact on the reef offered an easy entrance. Pedro turned on his flashlight and entered the lower deck, where the darkness was almost total. The interior of the ship was a labyrinth of narrow corridors, desolate cabins, and ruined engine rooms. The floor was covered with debris, pieces of metal, rotten planks, and dried algae. Each step echoed, amplified by the rusted metal, sounding like a warning. The smell of salt and rust intensified, mixing with a strange odor of mold and something that resembled decaying, sickly, and fetid flesh. In the kitchen, broken plates were still on the shelves. In the radio room, the equipment was destroyed. In each cabin, personal belongings lay scattered: a solitary boot, a faded portrait, a wet, open diary. Fragments of lives abruptly cut short.
As he climbed to the command bridge, a strange sound began. At first, it seemed just like the wind howling through the metal plates, but it soon turned into a low, drawn-out murmur, whispering voices welcoming him from the depths of the ship. Pedro stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. He focused his flashlight, but the darkness seemed to move and distort at the edges of the light. A metallic creak like chains being dragged, came from the upper deck. Then a muffled thud. The smell of decaying flesh became unbearable.
He climbed the broken stairs. On the command bridge, the flashlight revealed dark, wet trails that were barefoot footprints, dragging through the dust and rust. They led to a puddle of rusty water, where something was shining. An old brass compass, with its needle spinning wildly. As he touched it, Pedro felt an icy cold and heard an agonizing wail echoing through the entire structure. A chorus of male voices in despair. The flashlight flickered and went out. In the darkness, something brushed against his arm. The murmurs became screams. There were metallic scraping sounds like nails on steel. Pedro felt multiple presences all around him. Then he heard, again, the sound of chains, now closer, and a guttural, distorted voice whispered in his ear, "You've run aground with us." Pedro tried to run, but his feet got buried in the debris. He fell, hitting his head. When he opened his eyes, he was somewhere else. The deck looked the same, but now it was clean, shiny. The sun was coming through the windows. The Corriente Quebrada was intact. Men were walking hurriedly. Voices shouted orders amid the sound of steam engines. Pedro walked among them, invisible, like a ghost. No one noticed him. He was witnessing the past. He saw an officer arguing with the captain. The weather was changing. A monstrous storm was approaching. They should have turned back, but something was compelling them to continue. A mysterious cargo in the hold, sealed with padlocks and symbols scratched with a knife. A crewman tried to convince the others to throw it overboard, but it was too late. That night, the sea swallowed the ship. Pedro saw everything: the thunder, the screams, the terrified faces of the crew trying to escape something that didn't come from the sea, but from within.
When he regained consciousness, he was lying on the floor, back in the present. His camera was still recording. He could barely breathe. A figure was standing in front of him. It was the same man he had seen before, on the trail. "Silas," Pedro whispered, confirming the name engraved on one of the boots he had found on the ship. The old man took off his hat. His face was partially disfigured, as it had been corroded by time. "I was the last to abandon the ship. I survived, but I didn't escape." His eyes were black as pitch. "You brought them back." I didn't know," Pedro murmured. "Now you know, and you'll carry that with you, forever."
Silas disappeared into the fog, and Pedro ran, stumbling, bleeding, his lungs burning, all the way to the beach. But when he reached his car, he saw that it was no longer there. In its place, only his own footprints, heading towards the sea. He turned around. The Corriente Quebrada seemed bigger now, closer, almost alive. An invisible force pulled him back, as if the sand were swallowing him. Pedro struggled, screamed, but all that came out was a hoarse moan. Voices began to call his name. He felt hands grabbing his ankles, frail, skeletal. In a last attempt at resistance, he activated his voice recorder and whispered, "They're here, all of them." And he was dragged into the darkness. The next morning, the clouds at Bone Beach began to slowly dissipate.
Pedro's vehicle reappeared, covered in sand, with the door open. The camera was still recording, but Pedro was not there. And whoever approaches the carcass of the Corriente Quebrada today can still hear it. A faint, persistent wail coming from inside the ship's passageways, mixed with the smell of salt, rust, and something the tide never takes away.